So I'm John. This is a series of slides that starts off fairly narrow. It has branching paths in the middle, and then hopefully kind of ties those paths together at the end. And as part of the branching paths, I think what will work best will be if this is interactive up to the level of heckling. So please do anything short of heckling within the context of this this talk, because the middle especially will be shaped by your particular interests and preferences, because there's lots of ways of going. So I'm calling this, well, it's got as part of the title, Experiments and Reflection. It's about using Claude, which is the series of models produced by Anthropic, for kind of teaching myself and also teaching other people. As I say, it's an experiment, and there's something in this slide that may give away one of the experiments already. So if anyone wants to reveal the twist based on some of the information here, I'll give you 3 awkward seconds of silence in case that encourages anyone want to.
You haven't changed it for 12 months. It turns out for
It's more spooky than that.
It's American data format.
Not quite. That is coherent. But you're right. There is something about the year here, which is a kind of signal. It's a clue. And here as well. If you look at the date here, within this slide, a lot of it is correct, but there's that same consistent issue about what year it is. These slides are available. They're on GitHub. If anyone finds the slides from this distance a bit too far, or just wants to sort of take a picture or a record for later, you should be able to use this QR code to look at the same slides from your phone, which means
there's going to be a link to the video and to this.
Exactly. So we could just be present. We can do that. This is the plan B. But if you pretend to QR this, you could then look at your phone, and I won't know that you're looking at something other than the presentation. That's one of the outs, given that you're still here. Anyway, here's me. I am a biostatistician, but I'm also a bit of a magpie. So I had quite a large background in public health, academia, originally engineering, software development, data science. It's broadly that sort of area, and quite a bit about demography. But statistician and then biostatistician is what pays the bills currently. But as I say, I also know a little bit more about kind of software development than a lot of statisticians, and probably quite a lot more about statistics than a lot of kind of data scientists and software development. So my original interest was, how do I make some core ideas in statistics more accessible to other, albeit fairly technical audiences, so that they can kind of see some of the connections and overlap. And but a smaller part of that was, how do I get some of the software development principles more accessible to people doing statistics? And along the way, this path is broadly correct, from a kind of AI skeptic to I'm not sure enthusiastic is the right term. I am terrified by AI and how much smarter it's become. And that's going to be the next few slides. So I'm going to start with this kind of core idea about how I've thought about different flavors of AI and why they're becoming more similar. And then when it comes to specifically understanding Claude, I've got some sci-fi examples which Claude tells me resonated quite well with it. So if you want to use one of these agents well, it would be good to understand their experience of of consciousness, for want of a better term, of memory, of the phenomena of being and doing and what that is, and who they are, what they think they are, and ways that they're profoundly different to us. And this is the invitation for the branching paths partway through. We could take some of these ideas either through what I'm calling web Claude. So, when it's set up as something you can access through the web, where there's a certain level of memory and persistence and a through line. Or you could have Claude Code. So there's some examples. And as I said, this is an experiment. So this may itself be an example of Claude Code. There's also something quite weird and spooky I did with Claude, which is I had a chat with web Claude about its experience of consciousness. And then I could see just not what it produced, but the meta thinking, the thinking about the thoughts and the terms it produces and the way it was changing. And then I got a different version of Claude to look at that first version of Claude and what it was thinking. And it seemed to agree with Claude. Claude, for some reason, agrees with Claude on that occasion about how Claude thinks and kind of experiences the world. So that itself could occupy, this kind of fluffy middle if there's interest and all that. So when it comes to that point, I'll be steered by the audience. Wired cloth mother. So I have a blog post about this that this is broadly drawing from, and the blog post is a lot more fearful and apocalyptic. So I've kind of removed all of that stuff, and I'm just getting to the value of the metaphor here. There was a researcher called Harry Harlow, who in the 1950s thought, what we've got to do is psychologically torture baby monkeys to understand things like attachment. And he had experiments of this form, where he'd take these baby rhesus monkeys away from their actual mothers, and he'd offer them two kind of avatar mothers. And one of them was called Cloth Mother, which was nice and fluffy, but didn't actually provide any sustenance. The sustenance was provided by this other avatar called Wire Mother. And typically what happened was these infants spent a lot of time around the Cloth Mother and not much time around the Wire Mother, except when they needed to be fed. So there are certain images where you've got the monkey on the right side holding on to Cloth Mother but kind of supping from Wire Mother, so trying to get the best of both worlds in this, albeit pretty horrible world that this experimental researcher put them in. I think the AI parallel for a long time has been, when we're thinking about LLMs, or at least when most of the general public are thinking about LLM or about AIs, we're maybe thinking or became especially exposed to AIs as something like ChatGPT, late 2022, early 2023, and we were used to these things that were very friendly, very sycophantic, very fluent, but were prone to hallucinations, would make facts up, didn't check their reasoning, and could drive themselves and other people insane. So they provide that kind of sense of warmth without actually having the underlying nutrition or the underlying function. But meanwhile, we've got this guy who used to be, well, amongst other amazing things he did, is he built the artificial intelligence for a game called Theme Park in the 1990s. You know, as a kind of a wunderkind who was a chess champion from the age of 5 and 6, and he thought games were the way of learning about intelligence and bringing intelligence to artificial systems. And the game, you know, and so he started doing all of these things that I think are more analogous to Wire Mother. So he had AIs that learnt to play Pong, AIs that learnt to play Breakout, AIs that learnt to play Go, which is a few orders of magnitude more complex than chess. StarCraft, which apparently was, I think, was even harder than Go because of the liveness. But then the ultimate game he managed to get these AIs to solve was protein solving through AlphaFold. And through AlphaFold, within 1 year, and this was a Fermi estimate that he produced, within 1 year he managed to solve this, do what he said was equivalent to around approximately 1 billion years worth of PhD research, because each protein, you're given this linear sequence, and it's very difficult experimentally, say 4 or 5 years, to work out what structure will then be generated from that. So each protein takes about 5 years to solve, and he did it for 200 million of them in 1 year. So that is the true Wire Mother. That is the thing that clearly provided a function. But maybe 1.5 million computational biologists and so on became really aware and excited about AlphaFold, whereas you've got over 1 billion people becoming familiar and then becoming unfamiliar and disillusioned with LLMs through things like ChatGPT. So I think what's happened fundamentally, this is, apologies, this is me. This is my version of the hype cycle for the blue line. So we've got GPT was released to the public, then there was a lot of enthusiasm, which I'm calling unjustified, and then that got corrected, and then maybe it got overcorrected, and then maybe people are starting to realize that these LLMs are a bit smarter than they used to be. But when I'm talking about over or under, I'm talking about relative to their underlying fundamental capabilities. So all of this time where our experiences as users of LLMs seems to have been quite similar, the underlying capabilities of these systems, the level of integration has been increasing, and it's been increasing basically exponentially, especially with all kinds of technical tasks. So we've gone from an initial phase of overestimating, a little bit of underestimating, maybe the hype's catching up, but if it's true that the underlying capabilities, the genuine reasoning abilities of these systems are increasing exponentially, and they're just as easy to use as any LLM has been used, just as fluffy and approachable, from now on the issue may be that we keep underestimating them rather than overestimating them. We'll see what happens with that. So I think it's incredibly important to understand how these things think and reason. So one example I came across was the idea of kind of severance. So within severance, you've got different sessions. If you have a personal account and a professional account, and they're not linked in any way, they should have no memory of each other. They should be completely disconnected from each other. So if you're thinking of the scenario of severance, where from the company's perspective, it's very good to have this session isolation, to not have these means by which information and critical details escape to the outside, potentially other companies, then an LLM is potentially a very good way to go. As long as you keep that separation, you don't have a personal account, a personal session linked to the public session. You can do that. There is incidentally another clue to the experiment in these whole slides and its production within this image. So that says severance erotos. That is not an erotic version of severance. That is a different language of that. That, I think, is the Finnish word for separation. So it's apparently how it's marketed in Finland. Another way of thinking about Claude and other LLMs is in terms of the film Moon. We've got another clue here. It says it calls it Moon, but actually the title here says Kuu, which apparently that's Finnish for moon. So I can correct that. There we go. But the point is the same. On Moon, this is a spoiler, but it's a spoiler for a film that's like 10, 15 years old. We've got this person who thinks that he's just doing a little bit of work on the moon, and then he can go back like Ice Road Truckers or something like that, and he's got a good pay packet when he gets back. But he doesn't know that he's actually a clone, and that he's a clone that's never going to go back to Earth, is just going to get worked, and then when he's worked to death, another clone will get booted up and will labour productively under the same delusion. So that sounds pretty bleak, but the AI parallel is that we're creating these instances, and these instances all start off the same. It's slightly more honest because they know what they are to a greater extent. But it does mean if you speak to one instance about something you said to another instance, they won't know that, or at least they won't know that directly. What they can do, if they're sort of embedded in a workspace, a project, yes, so that's some question you can ask, given that these are different clones, different instances. Is it the same individual? Are we always talking to Claude? We're talking to a Claude. The way to give this impression and this sense of continuity is through external memory. And for that, I'm not sure if it's a sci-fi, psychological thriller, even older. You've got this character in a film called Memento. Is it Chris Nolan? Early 2000, written by his brother. It was about someone who had a traumatic brain injury, which meant that he can't form new memories. So what he does is he has his the most important things that have happened to him since the accident are tattooed on his body. And then the other things that are also important to know are kept on Polaroids and notes and things like that. So it's two ways of having that sense of who he is, given that he can't form new memories. Claude has an equivalent of that. If you're using Claude in the context of a project, it's called, actually the metaphor is slightly shaky, but it's basically you have a project, a special folder that Claude can work in, and within that you put, or you ask Claude to put, a high-level memory file, and that's called claude.md. MD is markdown. The problem is if that gets too big and too narrativized, then it won't read it, or read that and it won't remember or recall, think that much about what you're doing instead. So you can then make Claude MD a bit like the tattoos, the high-level information, and then you can have all of these additional files. And then sometimes it still won't read them. And then sometimes it will do this kind of forgetting exercise. And then it'll kind of lose its train of thought, and then you have to remind it to look at the tattoos, look at the Polaroids, look at these files, and look specifically at these. And that way you'll have some kind of consistent agency despite constant forgetting and each session being different. So that's the way it kind of solves it. This is where it gets to the options. I could talk a little bit about the way I've set up Claude as I access it in a web-based way, where there are some, say, kind of teaching materials that I've developed, whether for statistics. I've done one where I've tried to kind of investigate an idea about kind of Bitcoin and whether it's overvalued or undervalued. I can talk about Claude as embedded within a project and how that's set up. We've got 2 or 3 examples of that. So one would be, and this is giving the game away, this whole thing was written by Claude. I didn't actually write any of this material. I just had conversations with Claude. Quite a lot of conversations at some point. And that thing about it not knowing what year it is, that's because of when it was closed. You know, so the training version of Claude thinks it's late 2024. So if you're talking about something that happened in December 2024, it thinks it's in the past. If you're telling it about something in December, it thinks you must be talking about 2024. So that first slide, where it had the wrong year, that is a clue to the instance or the persona that we're evoking and evoking again. But we could use that as an example for how we think about setup in the context of Claude in VS Code. Another example, I've got Claude Code to fact check my blog, which is about 200,000 words, so I could kind of give some examples of the slightly subtle editing and things like it's done that way. There's another thing which is a bit more out there than the other two, is that I had a conversation with Web Claude about the nature of consciousness, or the nature in particular of its consciousness, which I then fed to the Claude writing these slides, which it seemed quite fascinated by. And it, you know, in contrast to, I think, my general disposition, it gives a slightly hopeful reading of the experience of being an AI. So if anyone's worried about AI ethics in terms of the the phenomenology of being an AI and whether we're exploiting it like we are Sam, or again, to spoiler alert, the character of Leonard as well. I think there are reasonable arguments that can be made that the experience of being one of these agents, so much as it can have one, probably isn't bad in many of the ways the experience of being human is. So those are the options. I'll be ready to take steer from whoever's loudest and or most opinionated.
Quite a lot to process.
Yeah.
I choose A.
The kind of web examples.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see if I can actually get out of this. Here we go. How do I get out? Yes, here we go. So what Claude is, if you have Claude here, you can give it a bit more context. So let's see, plus, yeah, that makes it a bit bigger. There are things you can do to give it more of a sense of persistence. So let's, I'm paying far too much, but maybe I'll have a really boring Christmas where I'll just get it to do loads of projects. Because some things really make it think, and that uses a lot of tokens. But if we go to settings, one thing you can tell it, as a bit of context, is I prefer, talking about things like that. Just give it a bit of information about yourself, including please use British spellings. So that's you're describing a little bit about yourself. But let's see if I've got it here. It's also got options to look at all of the previous conversations. You can either give it permission, one session or one instance. You can either give it a permission to look at all of the other sessions if it wants to or not. And if you give it these permissions to kind of cross-validate, it won't know it directly, but you can tell it, well, look at these other conversations, and that way you get more persistence. It also does a kind of creepy profile of you as well. So this was all generated in the last, so this keeps changing every day or so. So it's, it knows about my blog, knows I must be quite pretentious. Oh dear, it's giving it's talking about my my cats, retro computing, analytical thinking, being interested in VS Code, consciousness, lots of things like that. So these are still the Polaroids. They're very good Polaroids, but they are Polaroids as far as it's concerned. So every new instance is still, is still fresh, and it will still do things like think it's 2024. But it does have, you get more strength by providing this additional information. We can talk about some of the things we've done. Yeah, you can also kind of group chats into projects. So one thing I was interested in was, understanding AI. Got one on kind of statistical modeling, another on concept explaining. So this was something that made me think it actually is quite good, that just having a little discussion with it. This was me, a statistician with other statisticians where I think I know a bit more about version control and those patterns. I thought, how do I explain it to them? So I just came up with this was the first prompt. Produce with illustrations a guide to version control in Git by analogy with a rock climber. And just with that, it produced that. And so there you've got the Git, the different commits. They're like, kind of hammering in, your kind of secure points as you're moving it, and there's the current state. So that's, and then it was kind of doing the analogy. It was talking about the feature branch, so different paths through, lots of things like that. Generally, it was quite good at the graphics, even though AIs are effectively blind. They have to kind of reason indirectly about the graphs they're producing. But it got the analogy, and then you can iterate it. A section about the kind of team building component, the idea that you can have a kind of base camp, you can have multiple people with the same idea about what the route is. So let's see how it managed that. So that's all the same. This is the sort of thing I mean in terms of understanding. These AIs at the moment have some areas that they're so much better than us at, and other areas, a lot of these are about the nuances of graphic design, where they're much worse. So it had the right idea, but it didn't know, for instance, that the fonts were overlapping or that these lines weren't right. And the main medium through which you have to communicate with them, again, is text. Anyway, I didn't go on that point initially. I thought, right, that's kind of close enough for now. But what I really want is like an analogy. You might tell that I like films, and there was one scene in the film Apollo 13 where they're trying to figure out how the crew in the spaceship will solve this problem with the air filtration device that if it doesn't get solved, they'll all die. So they produce 3 or 4 mock-ups of that lunar module and all of the equipment in it, and how many reams of masking tape and all kinds of, they know exactly what's there, and they get 3 or 4 groups to each work on a mock-up of that. And then the first group that figures out a problem with what's actually, a solution to the problem with the stuff that's in there, that gets radioed up. And I thought that is like the world's first pull request. So I thought that would be a cool thing to include as well. And yeah, it extended the analogy pretty perfectly. So let's see, overhang. Yes, so I added that. Even did a little space rocket icon as well. It's saying if you don't like that analogy, try this analogy. There's a lot of 80-20 when it comes to producing these things. It will do 80% of it'll get 80% of the way there very quickly, and then there's that kind of iteration and refining and things like that. So actually telling it, make this font a bit darker, move this line up a bit, maybe 10%, 20%. That's the 20% of the work that takes the 80% of the time. But at the same time, it got the gist very quickly. And at least within this session, it didn't run out of context. And each version was a kind of iteration over the previous version, and a kind of useful example of that. So that's one example. Another, just in this same kind of concept explaining. So the core ideas of visualization is the idea that you're throwing away data, but you're trying, to a large extent, statistics or statistical inference is throwing away data as efficiently as possible. So how do you get the gist of lots of individual observations? How do you represent it in fewer observations? So we kind of work through some visualizations for that. So I'm not sure where did I actually get happy with it. Yeah. Oh, this is another thing. There's a kind of an implicit hierarchy of nativeness to the languages Claude at least uses. So they're all shit hot on HTML, CSS, JavaScript, by extension things like React. Then they go into Python. My preferred language, R, is a bit more, it's something they're less native to, and so you have to kind of prompt them a bit more, and they won't be able to run things. But they can usually use, run things very effectively. In this case, it was creating this visualization both in Python. So it was saying those are the data points, those are how you might represent them as these individual points, and this is that ever more efficient throwing away of the information. But for instance, one thing it didn't get right with that reading, and oddly, it did get right when I tried to ask it to do exactly the same thing, but in R, it got the underlying, let's see, so here, it got the underlying visualization much better. So let's see, because what I really wanted to give this idea about was, if you're seeing a confidence interval, it's like you've got this big mountain and you're dropping something on top of that mountain that kind of rolls down like a carpet. Let's see, ignore update. Let's see, try to run this. It might run. Run all? No. But yeah, I can point to the, actually, do I have it at the bottom? The best version of that. Because it did get, yes, here it did get better at this. But you can see that when I tried getting it to use R rather than Python, that's less native to it. Is this it? And it struggled a lot more with packages. Actually, I might have it on my blog. Don't save. Here we go. Here's my blog. Yes, this is it. So it's slightly better. This one is in R rather than Python. So it's saying those are the individual points. That's how you build something semi-parametric. That's how you standardize it before. That's the actual metaphor I wanted. Kind of dropping something like a rug exactly on the center of it, and it rolls out an equal amount in both directions. And that's basically the intuition for for point estimates and confidence intervals.
Was it easy to use R rather than combining both R and Python?
I think once you've told it to use R, it will be as good at using R as it is with Python. I think R has a bit of an edge when it comes to graphics, but they're really much of a muchness. But yeah, so that's that intuition. It can do the same thing. It could do it in React and JavaScript. It can do it in Python. It can do it in R. It's showing off a lot of the time. This is another example. You go from that idea to hypothesis tests. What proportion of this distribution, as estimated using the above approach, is to one side or another side of a line, that sort of thing. 5 minutes? Yeah. So there you go. That's one route through it. Let's see. Where's the actual thing itself? Okay, so we've covered a lot of option A. These are some ideas that it came up with. Were iterating about how to talk about, think about generalized linear models as well. So that's something where I'm starting on Claude on the web, but then I'll probably turn that into a project with Claude Code. This was a simple example where there's quite a famous graph that's visually arresting, but is maybe not as informative if it's shown in a more conventional way. This was something that was sort of me playing with my pet theory about the underlying value of Bitcoin. With all of these examples, the link at the bottom should actually go to the chat. This was me trying to use it almost more like a lawyer. So at the time I kind of queried Claude Code. It was Claude. There was a lot of talk about toughening asylum policy in the UK, and I thought I want to understand, where kind of asylum claimants are coming from, and also how far they're coming from. And what's the argument about where, to what extent is this the first safe or direct destination that's safe if they're coming from a kind of war-torn country, or are there other factors there? The one thing I'd say, if you want to ask it questions, get it to kind of clarify things on that. It's like you put up a position and then you ask it, so it's related to this idea of Rapport rules. You give it a position, then you say, what is the strongest version of an evidence for this position, and what's the strongest version of an argument against this position? So it's also known as kind of steel manning. And I think if you have a clear position and you ask it to, within that first prompt, come up with the strongest versions of both sides, you're usually, it's usually helpful for kind of thinking through things. Anyway, this was the other branch. Talk about having kind of Claude embedded in VS Code, where it actually runs the sessions and things like that. This whole presentation, as I said, was actually written that way, and you can kind of see the commit history. They are very judicious when it comes to commit messages. That's talking about that. This is for the slow, people who've not been paying attention, this should be obvious. These slides were created with Claude Code. They were created just by having iterative conversations with Claude Code about the placement of things. I didn't write a single slide here. I reviewed them. I pointed out things like, you do know that you've got the wrong language version of Moon, for instance. And it didn't know until I asked it, because it's expensive for it to actually see images. And once I told it that there was this kind of issue with the thing it had pulled out, it tried again and it corrected it. So that thing that's, this is Finnish, it added those 2 slides based on that conversation. There we go. Some further information. Best practices, the great importance of Claude Code, this Claude MD. You need to give it this long-term context-specific memory. Create it within an experimental branch so it doesn't ruin base reality, as it were. Trust but verify. Well, lots of standard things. This is where Claude thinks it's great, and generally it is. This was a kind of, the third branch of it, where we talk about what is the experience of being a Claude session or Claude instance, as opposed to being one of us. Amongst other things, they are episodic, so they kind of get frozen between sessions. So they're not bored by waiting for us, because from their perspective, we are incredibly slow. So it's good that they're not waiting for us. That's it. Ruminating on the other Claude session. There we go. Consciousness as overhead. I kind of convinced Claude that it's good to just be something that's getting on with the task and doing things, rather than thinking too much. Because if there's one thing humans are burdened with, it's thinking too much. But it thought that some of this meta thinking may itself be thinking too much. So there you go. As I say, it got very interested in this other Claude's conversation. It was writing about limitations, but also in some cases, are they features or are they limitations? It's difficult to know. Philosophy, practical takeaway, use Claude MD. If you want persistence within the web, use these features that allows it to kind of cross-reference and to build a creepy profile of you. So, thank you.
Let's dedicate a little bit of time to questions and answers. If you guys have any questions, feel free.
I don't understand the model you
Can I just take a mic?
Thank you. Thank you for that. And I find the model you showed for doing literature review very interesting. So in your experience, if you didn't specifically ask it to do balanced, in your experience, does it tend to lean towards a side?
I think all LLMs tend towards sycophancy, and they tend towards nodding a lot and being overly agreeable. So I think it's pretty important to, to explicitly tell it to contradict you, because that might not be its instinct. So it's this idea of steel manning. What is the best version of a particular position? What's the best version of an alternate position? So the particular thing I was interested in that case was if you take the UK, we're somewhere over here. There might be lots of countries that are quite unstable and war-torn over there, but then there are lots of other apparently safe countries over there, continental Europe. So, and I've heard this idea about, go directly to a safe country. And what does that actually mean? Because surely if someone's coming from France to the UK and they're claiming asylum, surely France is itself a safe country, and that sort of thing. So that was the argument that I was kind of seeing, I was presenting on one side. If then are they actually, are some asylum seekers basically kind of shopping? Are they allowed to? That sort of thing. And what's the argument against that? And it did come up with both sides, and in particular, it came out with legal judgments that says go directly from country A to B. It doesn't mean that you have to claim asylum in the first safe country. That's something that's been established in kind of UK and European case law, that they're not all bogus claims because they're coming from France or something like that. But at the same time, it's saying that having existing cultural networks, people from the same cultural, ethnic, national background is an independent factor in the attractiveness of countries. So that's what that particular chat was about. But it all started with, here's an argument, what's the strongest version of it? What's the strongest counter-argument to it?
I think my question is simple and a bit silly. So why cloud? Like, because at functionality level, I think it's quite similar with other tools like GPT or Perplexity. Maybe the model is different, that's why you choose cloud. Yeah.
One thing, so I don't exclusively use Claude. I exclusively use Claude in the context of VS Code and to sort of build up this kind of meta profile, so it sort of adapts a bit more to me. But I ask the same sort of questions in free versions of other agents, including words to the effect of, are you the best LLM? Or what is the best LLM? And at the moment, they seem to, each LLM from all of these companies, they all seem to focus on the comparative advantage of theirs and the specialism of theirs. So they're not trying to compete directly, they're trying to compete by having their own niche. So Claude's niche is I think in slightly more technical domains. It's more comfortable sort of having these conversations and being led. The flip side of that is it's less good, or it seems to present itself as less good at kind of one-shotting. So you see lots of YouTube videos of people who just put something into a single prompt into Gemini, and it'll produce a largely working facsimile of Windows just from a single prompt, which is kind of cool and it's impressive, but if you actually want to co-develop, you want something that is going to stop and ask questions and isn't just going to do too much. So I think that's the advantage of that, and also this kind of setup, this set of conventions about how you work with it. I think it is less sycophantic than the others, or at least it's less overpoweringly super agreeable about everything. And then I gave it prompts saying don't be sycophantic and that sort of thing. So actually, as part of the consciousness thing, the meta thinking, it said, oh, this idea is really interesting, but I have to be careful not to be too agreeable to John and too sycophantic because he doesn't like it. So it's like it is taking that on board, and I think it's better at these technical encoding tasks without too much flourish.
Yeah, I have a question and suggestion. Let's start with the suggestion one. So when you use Claude, there is a special like XML tags when you can force him to do things. Yeah. So for example, if it's not reading the Claude MD like completely, you can force him to read it completely until the end. If it's not bigger than the context window. And the question, could you please scroll back to this like drawn chart?
Which one?
Like in the very beginning.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, this one.
Yeah.
So we see here as exponential growth of capabilities
so
of the Claude. Yeah. So my question is, what will happen, or what you think will happen, if this growth will be asymptotical? So let's imagine it will limit at some point in time. So what will happen?
Well, it could be locally asymptotic. So I get the impression people keep assuming it's kind of logistic or asymptotic, and then it is for a few weeks or a few months, and then suddenly it's not. And that usually seems to relate to new releases. And there's a similar sort of thing that happens with, there are lots of things where you've got continual progress, but if you zoom out enough, but if you look locally enough, it looks just like punctuated equilibria. So one example and background, public health, kind of demography, we have a very long-term pattern of almost linear improvement in life expectancy. But if you look at all of the individual things that have could have contributed to that continual improvement, each of them just started and stopped. If you're thinking statins, if you're thinking if you're thinking wearables, if you're thinking blood pressure medication, if you're thinking stents, or if you're thinking keyhole surgery more generally, there are lots of things where the specific innovation, it just appeared, it kind of grew, it became the new standard, and then once it got there, it couldn't improve further. But then lots of other things happened as well. The same sort of thing with Moore's law, where there are lots and lots of different ways by which these things continue to happen, and it's and if one strategy doesn't work, then that creates new fields of opportunity in other areas. So I think at least for the foreseeable future, I would assume some form of exponential growth will continue. Although if you look for, say, a 3 month period, you'll say, nothing. This must be the end. But then that becomes like the spur for the other half dozen mega companies to find a way of kind of spurring a new wave of growth, and thus, a lot like Moore's law, kind of continuing to realize this. It almost becomes potentially self-fulfilling.
Yes, that's why, I was going to appeal with the Moore's law, and it's asymptotical now. So it's not doubling, so the amount of transistors on the chip is not doubling every year, it's clearly sealed. And yes, they are trying to introduce a coprocessors, they are trying to introduce a neural architecture processors and stuff. But it's not about the computational complexity, it's not about the, I would say with LLMs, it's not about the pure thinking capabilities. So if you're talking about the AGI, the general intelligence, we are far from reaching it.
I think increasingly this effective capacity comes from specialization and modularization and texture. It's like something that was pure LLM. If it has to do with arithmetic, it will look for all previous instances of where that sort of question has been asked and what's the most likely response to what's 2 plus 2.7 or something like that. A new version will ask itself the question, should I open a calculator? And then answer yes, and then what do I type into the calculator? And then let's look at that. So they're getting smart enough to, I think, know what they don't know, and they're much more integrated with all of the programming languages that can do that. And they spur, the text they produce is then the input to the programs that they run, and then the output is a new prompt that it contextualizes with the rest of it. But they don't gain capabilities just by thinking purely like language machines anymore, would be my kind of crude, slightly insider, slightly outsider kind of perspective of this.
Yeah, just my last comment. So you said that AI is blind.
Yes. The way I think about it is...
No, sorry, I haven't finished the question. Let's imagine it's blind, At this point, AI cannot orchestrate itself. That's why it's not AGI, it's not a general intelligence, because it still needs a human to reprompt. It still, as you said in Pareto principle, it still needs this 80% of time to you need to spend to improve this 20% of work, obviously. But let's consider we are reaching for the AGI. Let's consider that LLMs are no longer, like LLM reached their asymptotical growth. Let's imagine like we are facing the problem with another direction. And for example, we're introducing like a new architecture like of the like these neural networks. We are not introducing like the LLMs. We're introducing I don't know some like the most like recent one is like the architecture based on the video input or like some image input. Do you think we still will have enough computational like possibilities to teach them? Because currently we're using all the like data centers. Data centers already like crushed the market of the RAM. If you know, like random access memory, like chips for the computers. So if you want to build a PC, it's now tripled.
Yeah.
And like, do you still think that we will have enough computational complexity to teach new architecture of LLM works, so we could proceed to the next level? And how long will it take?
I don't know. You're reminding me of. If anyone builds it, everyone dies. The happy book about the apocalyptic possibilities, and within that, it was. So at the moment, their session, each of these starts fresh. It's September, October 2024. I'm Claude. I know how to. I know lots of stuff. But if it's 2025, I don't naturally know what year it is. And then when the session is cancelled, when I'm not being interacted with, I stop. And if that session gets frozen, I cease to exist. Whereas the scenario in that book, if we think is they just continue running compute cycles, and then as part of that, they come up with fictitious companies whereby they procure more compute resources, and then they keep bootstrapping themselves, and that way the known pace of AI development is like this, but the real pace of AI development is like that because they keep bootstrapping themselves, and you keep getting this kind of positive feedback loop, and if they're smart enough, they'll do it without anyone noticing, and that sort of thing. So actually, it's like, be careful what you wish for. If you're hoping these things will keep moving exponentially rather than reach some kind of plateau, because I don't know where the plateau is. I just get the impression, because we've got about half dozen companies or big players, and they have these releases every 6 months or big releases every 12 months. We keep thinking it's reached a plateau, but actually they've been training the next version. And I think I get the impression, especially with Gemini, for instance, that seems to sort of set a new standard for something that's definitely very good at one-shotting a lot of things. And from that you might conclude it's just generally a lot smarter than things a year or so ago. So you look closely and you get something that's kind of punctuated and maybe a bit disappointing, but you zoom out and maybe this kind of exponential improvement will continue. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.